Here's why I find the Popular Vote Pact hilarious. If you don't know, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an agreement among some state legislatures to fix the Electoral College by directing their electors to vote in compliance with the national popular vote. This pact is questionable on every level and ill-advised, especially for the proponents of the pact. To begin with, there's the question of legality. The Constitution allows state legislatures to appoint electors in any way they see fit, which would seem to validate this pact, but there remain questions of transferability, and a court challenge to the pact would make for an interesting fight. Then, of course, you run into the fact that it won't fix the college at all. It will only break it further. A little history is necessary here. For most of its existence, the electors of the Electoral College were selected based on the votes of individual congressional districts plus 2 statewide electors. This had the effect of amplifying everyone's vote. You voted in a smaller pool, and the winner of that pool had a vote in an even smaller pool. There's some math that I barely understand that shows why this is awesome and about as close to pure democracy as we are ever likely to come. Sometime in the last century, however, states started changing the way their electors were assigned. One by one, the states switched to an all-or-nothing scheme, which meant that if you won a plurality of Texas's votes, you received all 38 electors, even if you only won Houston and Dallas and got pounded everywhere else. This has served to dilute, rather than concentrate, the popular vote. So now a voter in Texas' 9th Congressional District, who once had 1 vote in 800,000, resulting in 1 vote in 538, now has 1 vote in about 25 million, resulting in 38 votes out of 538. If you follow sports tournaments, that's the difference between single elimination and round robin. The pact would reduce you to a single voice out of 370 million, and suddenly you are lost in the mooing crowd, subject to the whims and the tyranny of the mob. So yeah, I agree that the college is broken, but the way it is broken can be fixed by returning to the single district plus 2 system, and not by ignoring the people to whom the electors are allegedly beholden. But, you know, democracy, right? The thing is, the United States is not and has never been a democracy. We are a federal republic, and repeated calls for unfettered democracy betray an unfortunate ignorance of all the reasons we're not one. Of course, the argument could be made that the Founding Fathers were all wealthy white men who wanted to establish a system in their own favor, and that is true, except that they essentially accomplished that by limiting voting privileges to free citizens who owned land. They arrived at the federal republic outlined in the Constitution by way of compromise, not a unified plan of exclusion. One thing they all agreed on was that they wanted to avoid any sort of mob rule. Even without the benefit of multiple scientific studies, they all knew that people get stupider the more of them you have in a room. Even a casual look at their writings will come up with multiple references to the tyranny of the mob. Of course, since they all agreed on it, really wasn't a compromise. Compromise demands difference, and these guys were all rich white men. No differences there, right? Not so fast. You see, it turns out that the more homogeneous a group gets, the more microvariances in culture and disposition they find to blow up into major points of contention. Anyone who's ever sat in on a homeowners association meeting can verify that, and these guys had some pretty big differences in disposition walking in. At the Constitutional Convention, you could find financial speculators like Hamilton, land speculators like Washington, intellectuals like Franklin, old money planters like Madison, new money merchants like Monroe, and even a few lawyers and professionals like Elbridge Gerry. These guys all had personal incomes and interests to protect, and that doesn't even account for the differences they faced due to their place of origin. Even back then, the United States was a pretty big place. At the time of the framing of the Constitution, the U.S. covered about 1 million square miles of land running down the North American coastline from the territory of Maine to the disputed southern border of Georgia, and inland to the Appalachian Mountains with claims to the Mississippi River Valley. So they were also representing a wide variety of regional interests, and it's not just a matter of not wanting to be the bottom dog in the federal pile. It's difficult, nearly impossible even, to fully understand and sympathize with the issue facing people whose experiences differ significantly from your own. Wet northern states like New York and Pennsylvania might see a strategic rock salt reserve as a no-brainer, where southern states with milder, even optional winters might wonder about the return on expense. This is underscored by the difference between urban and rural needs. Recently, Oregon passed a law allowing for self-serve gas stations in the rural areas of the state. This law faced severe opposition in the State House, especially from urban representatives who were concerned about spillage and other consequences of amateur operation, which, to be fair, can be considerable when viewed in the concentrated environment of a city. Before the bill could be passed, they had to be convinced of the hardships faced by rural citizens when gas stations went on limited hours or closed due to their inability to pay an extra full-time hand. More so, they had to be convinced to sympathize with these rural citizens. A daunting task when you remember that they didn't share any of the needs of the rural voters, they didn't need any of their votes, and they never saw them when they went home. And that's why the government is set up the way it is. It protects us from the momentary whims of the mob, but it also ensures that no individual region will overwhelm the will of any other. That's why the Electoral College is important and should be fixed, specifically by returning to the Congressional District +2 format, but should never be scrapped or bypassed. That is not, however, why I find the pact so hilarious. Here's the funny part. Assuming they intend to honor their deal and cast their electoral votes for the winner of the national popular vote, they're shooting themselves in the foot. The states behind this movement, indeed the only states even interested in it, are all blue states. They are states that have historically voted Democratic in presidential elections. They have everything to lose and nothing to gain by adopting this scheme. If a Democrat wins the popular vote, their pact has no predictable effect since, presumably, they would have been voting Democratic anyway. If a Republican wins, however, they find themselves in the position of supporting the opposition, possibly even handing him the election, or at least an improved majority. And that's why it's hilarious to me. Not because it's a boneheaded violation of every democratic principle that has sustained our country. It's hilarious because it's a great big butcher knife that they're preparing to use to cut off their own nose. Take that, face!